get started.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joanna Regal from KMJ Consulting, and on behalf of the Eastern Transportation Coalition, we welcome you to this afternoon's web meeting, Communicating CAV for DOTs, Public Perception, Awareness, and Education. Before we get started, we'd like to go through just a couple of housekeeping items. You can participate either with the audio, either through the web or through your phone line. If you participate through your phone line and you have any difficulties or questions, you can press *0. For anyone, you can contact Justin at 484-557-7009, and he can help you with any audio or web issues. All participants will be in listen-only mode during this web meeting. This web meeting is being recorded, and presentations along with the recording and a Q&A summary will be posted to the Coalition's website. All participants will receive a link to those documents once they're posted. Since participants are in listen-only mode, we're asking that any questions you have, please put them in the chat box for our speakers today. The questions will be monitored, and our speakers will answer them either at the end of the presentation or at the end of the web meeting. This time, I'd like to introduce Virginia Reeder. She's the Program Associate for the Innovation Program at the Eastern Transportation Coalition. Jenna?
Thank you, Joanna, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our fall webinar of our Connected and Automated Vehicle Program run by the Eastern Transportation Coalition. So let's go over the agenda quickly. We can move the slide. There we go. So today we have the great pleasure of having three really powerhouse folks here to talk to us about communicating CAV. And we're going to come at this from a few different angles. We're going to hear a little bit about what we know about what the general public thinks and understands and feels about the technology around connected and automated vehicles. And then we're going to hear about a DOT who's doing some really cutting-edge work in terms of how they're communicating this technology, this unknown future, to the public. And somehow we're going to work in baby cows and robot cars into that. And then finally, as we know, it's important to talk to the public, but it's also important for agencies to communicate and collaborate within themselves as this new connected and automated technology hits on every part of the operations that we have at our transportation agencies. So I'm really excited about today's conversation. So we're going to get started here. Are of all, this is our list of participants just to get a sense of the folks that have registered to participate. And I'm hoping most of them are here or will be coming on shortly. We have good representation across our coalition members. I think we have 11 of our main member state DOTs represented, and then as well many of the other partners and members that we have at different levels of government. We've even got some folks calling in from different parts of the country, which is exciting to see. We always try to get a larger representation at these webinars, and then some other partners, participants, folks doing really great work in this space. So welcome to everyone. We're really excited to have you. As Joanna mentioned, the presentation and webinar will be available afterwards online, and so if you see something here, hear something here, and you think someone else in your agency or another colleague would be interested, we really recommend that you forward that along. Next, I'm going to do a coalition update. I'm going to admit that I'm having a little bit of connection issues here, but hopefully you can all see the slide that is showing our big announcement, which is on July 1st, the I-95 Corridor Coalition became the Eastern Transportation Coalition. I know many of you have heard of this already, but we just wanted to make sure that news is out there and that everyone is aware of our new name, our new branding, and we're really excited. With this, we have a new website, which is cetcoalition.org. And we invite you to come take a look and see what we have going on there. We've got a great calendar. It's easier to see what we have going on, upcoming events. ways to get engaged, and all of that. And then quickly, I just wanted to run over a few of the coalition connected and automated vehicle and innovation events that we have done recently or have coming up. And I think a lot of you have participated in some of these things. So we have a automated vehicle readiness project that is underway. And we had a kickoff for that back in June. And next week we have a draft framework webinar meeting on September 30th. That is for our member stakeholder agencies, and we will be getting out a draft framework of that work that's going on. And if it's not on your calendar and you would like to participate and you're one of our member agencies, please reach out because we're really excited to be sharing that and getting input from all of our member agencies. And then at the same time, this is quarterly meeting season for us with our connected and automated vehicle regional groups. So we've had our Southeast and our Mid-Atlantic meetings. The Northeast one is coming up next week, and we're really excited to be sort of moving forward and digging into some of the work that we put together in our work planning season, which happened last spring. So getting the business out of the way, I am now really excited to tell you a little bit more about our presenters that we have. And again, I apologize, I'm having connection issues, but I'm hoping that you can see 4 lovely faces on your screen. First up, we have Kristin Kolodge. She is the Executive Director of Driver Interaction and Human-Machine Interface at JDPower. In this role, she's responsible for global research that brings the voice of the consumer into the product development process, both for the vehicles that are currently in production as well as for the future of mobility. Before this, she spent 18 years at Fiat Chrysler developing automotive features that enhance this customer interface. So she's got a lot of background and experience in the actual building of the technology, and then now she gets to think about how to bring that voice into this process. So welcome, Kristin. We're really excited. Then we have Kristen White, another Kristin, and she is Executive Director of Minnesota's Connected and Automated Vehicle Office. Now, this is one of the nation's leading tech startups and incubators that's within a state government, and it innovates transportation technology and automation to advance safety, equity, access, mobility, health, and sustainability. Kristin her background is in law and policy strategy, and so she gets to manage policy planning, research and development of emerging transportation technologies, and she's can boast the nation's first winter weather autonomous testing. Which being from Minnesota, that's the good spot for that. And we have 2 of our great coalition members, Carole and Roxane from Maryland. Carole Delion is the Division Chief for the Connected and Automated Transportation System within the Maryland Department of Transportation, the State Highway Administration. And she has a background in transportation system analysis, forecasting, strategic planning, and performance measure evaluation for emerging technologies. So she leads the connected automated vehicle work at SHA in Maryland. And then one of her close colleagues, they really work collaboratively together, we'll hear about that today, is Roxane Mukai. She's the operations engineer for the Division of Operations for the Maryland Transportation Authority. And she is the CAV liaison for the MT's working group that they have formed in Maryland, which is, again, we'll hear is a really strong, robust program and group that they have doing a lot of really cool stuff. She's been with MDT for 20 years. Before this, she was with the Division of Engineering, Traffic, and Planning. So she's got a lot of history with that agency and brings that all to bear on this CAV work. Welcome to everyone, and again, I'm really excited to hear all of these presentations. And before we get started, we're just going to do a couple of polling questions because we kind of wanted to get a sense from our audience of what kind of work in this communication of CAV space you have going on. So Joanna, I might ask you to jump in because, again, I'm not quite sure what everyone else is seeing on the screen. Maybe you can take over the polling question. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Of course. Sure. So the first polling question today is, my agency is actively engaged in, and you can check all that apply. So your options are clarifying the language and terminology we are using to communicate about CV, AV technology, communication about CVAV advancements and our plans and policies internally, communication with our partner agencies, local municipalities, et cetera, about CVAV plans, policies, programs, and pilots, and finally, communication with the public about CVAV technology, policies, pilots, et cetera. So again, you can check all that apply, and we're going to give it a moment until we can see that most of the folks have, in fact, had an opportunity to provide their input. Okay. Okay, it looks like everyone's had an opportunity, so in 3, 2, 1, we will end the poll. And we're going to move on to the next one. So we have another one right now. This second polling question. Staff from the following divisions are engaged in communication about CVAV, all types, internal, external, with leadership, etc. And again, you can check all that apply. So the options here are public affairs, planning, engineering, operations, including incident management, and other. So again, if you can take a moment, check all that apply. Right. Give it another minute, and once we end the poll, we're not going to close that just yet. We'll take a look. Okay, we're going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1. And before we remove that, just for Jenna's benefit, we're looking at the majority of responses, well, fairly spread out from operations at the highest, engineering, and then, planning and then engineering. This information,
great. Thank you, Joanna.
This information will, again, be part of the Q&A summary. So at this point,
okay. Yeah, thank you, Joanna. Thanks for doing that. Yes, thank you for doing that. And I think that's interesting information for our speakers today, too, to see where our members are, or where the participants are with this space. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristin Kolodge, and she's going to talk to us about taking our hands off the wheel. So Kristin, I'll let you take it away.
Well, thank you, Jenna, for the introduction, and thank you to the Coalition for inviting me to join your talk today. I'm really excited to hear the other speakers and certainly to share with you the type of research that we've been doing here at JDPower. So again, my name is Kristin Kolodge. I focus on how consumers are interacting with their vehicles today, and there's certainly a very close connection to that type of experience with various advanced driver assistance systems and what consumers' thoughts are as we start shifting towards greater levels of automation. So within JDPower, we focus on the voice of the customer. So you may be familiar with various trophies that you might see on TV. And just to give context what that trophy really represents, that is a culmination of typically tens of thousands, and in some cases, depending on the study, hundreds of thousands of consumers that have voiced their experience and their thoughts regarding various products. So again, my focus is within the automotive domain, and we've been doing a great amount of research for the vehicles that are on the road today, and also we've been looking at the consumer sentiment, so confidence, interest level, in the future of mobility. So for today's discussion, we'll focus on automated vehicles specifically. So I want to set the foundation, if you will, and just talk about what is going on with consumers today within the automotive landscape, and then you'll start to see how that ties into the future of mobility. So we have seen this concept where consumer requirements consistently change over time, and some of these are sparked by just expectations within the vehicle. Some of these are sparked by consumer expectations based on experiences, let's say with consumer electronic devices, And others, as we've seen recently with the situation with COVID-19, have changed consumer requirements again. So where, when JDPower started doing consumer research more than 50 years ago, at that point in time, the consumer requirements were very much focused around, is my vehicle working? Or is it in the dealership? Is something broken? A type of reliability or performance type of issue. But as we translated over time, we started to add more consumer requirements. So thinking about usability. So is the system intuitive and simple for me to use? And again, very much recognizing the fact that my definition of ease of use and intuitiveness may be very different than your definition. And we started to see more and more types of these requirements coming along. Compatibility with different devices, so thinking about your smartphone and how it is compatible or maybe not with your vehicle, and certainly the level of satisfaction and or frustration that might come about as a result. We've seen the consumer requirement of trust being a very important element for consumers. This realistically started with technologies like your in-vehicle navigation system with voice recognition that has quickly grown in scope when you think about advanced driver assistance systems like your automatic emergency braking or your forward collision warning system or your blind spot warning system. Those types of elements are where you really start to see this relationship of trust being so important to the consumer. And then, where we are today is all of these requirements continue to add on. Realistically, you start to see kind of some barriers to entry, and then where you get to consumer requirements like surprise and joy and different elements that just go beyond consumer expectations, and that's the type of experience that consumers are looking for. And so as I mentioned, kind of that COVID-19 situation, that starts to add new potential requirements of cleanliness or different definition of safety, if you will. So this is very much a changing landscape for us and the industry to be able to navigate. One of the other areas that's really important for us to recognize is this hype cycle. And this research is done by the company Gartner, and it's really an interesting pattern that we see with consumer expectations and how that, how this almost repeatable pattern changes over time. So when we have a new, in this instance, I'll use automated vehicles as this type of new mobility model coming in. So when it was first starting to be talked about, you can see the consumer excitement and expectations continuing to build, if you will, just thinking about what the capability is, what this means, right? I might be able to sleep in the vehicle, I might be able to exercise, I might be able to live farther away from work, et cetera, right? And some of these expectations may be valid and others may be, essentially this element of inflation where that capability of the system is really not going to deliver on what that was hyped up to be. And when we start, after that peak, we start to see where some of those expectations versus reality comes into play. And we get to this point of trough of disillusionment. And then over time, the hype essentially begins to level out as consumers experience this technology more, come to terms with what it can deliver upon, et cetera. The reason why I'm bringing it up in this type of conversation here is when we're thinking about communication to the public regarding automated vehicles, it's very important to have a clear conversation, that we're not over-promising on what this type of mobility solution can bring to the public, that we're very clear on what that driver / passenger, depending on what level of automation we're talking about, what their role is in that driving task. We've certainly seen multiple incidents where there was a misconception over the vehicle's capability versus what it actually could handle, and certainly some dire consequences as a result. So the more that we can level set this, minimize that peak of inflated expectation and bring this more into reality, the better it's going to be for the industry long term. So I wanted to bring in some specific data regarding some of the essentially what we would call SAE, so the Society of Automotive Engineers, the level 1 system. So these are just the very initial stages of vehicle capability starting to take over some portion of control. So typically it's in one direction. So for instance, automatic emergency braking, right? It just controls that, you know, that ability to control the forward motion and intervene if necessary. Lane keeping or centering is the ability to either provide a warning and or provide the ability for the vehicle to stay centered in the lane. So the type of data that's shown here is very reticent of looking at both ends of the spectrum. So on a positive note, we see the area in the dashed blue line. This represents the percent of consumers that have reported that that this particular system has helped them to avoid a crash. Now, to put it in perspective, this data was gathered after 90 days of ownership. So this is a very short window of opportunity, again, that first 90 days where this consumer has discovered, started to utilize, and then certainly had an incident in which this type of system has intervened. So we can see some very positive numbers here. So for instance, blind spot warning, 52% of consumers have said that that system has helped them to avoid a crash. And so you can see where consumers are going to start to evaluate the value in that type of system, right? This starts to work as a partner for me, and I appreciate what it's doing for me and this task of driving. But we also see systems where there are red flag behaviors. So thinking about if the system is being annoying or bothersome, if it's startled this vehicle owner in any way, or if it's acting unusually, and then essentially has this vehicle owner temporarily disabled their system as a result. So that's the ultimate lost value situation where consumers are turning off their features, so the intended safety benefits of this system are no longer being realized, right? So the company and all of the resources that they've put into designing and developing and the safety implications accordingly are not being realized by the consumer. And the consumer, in many instances, most of these features at this point in time have a high degree of an option rate, so they have paid for these features in some way, and so there's lost value multiple directions. So the lane keeping and centering system is the one technology that has the greatest amount of what we would consider red flag behaviors for user experience. So we have over 30% of the people who have this technology have turned it off within that 90 days of ownership. So you can imagine here that type of, as we start to work our way towards greater levels of automation, if consumers are struggling with this foundational level of the vehicle staying within the lane itself, if this is a stumbling block, then that's going to have negative implications as we go forward with greater levels of automation. So to be able to provide some context, I've pulled in just some of the consumer comments regarding these systems. So it just paints a little bit of a picture on the contextual reasoning behind what they might be struggling with. And there's very much this theme of consumers wanting to know more information about the basics of, what this system is, when it operates, why it's operating, how it's operating. So lots more information just regarding the system itself, right? So within the engineering space, we would call that the operational design domain. But, from a consumer-facing perspective, they just want to know more about it so that it's not startling them. But some of these comments are very simple with respect to, for instance, this Kia Niro owner was talking about that they didn't realize they had it, and as the wheel would randomly shift on the freeway, this person thought that it was heavy wind, so they ended up looking up the system online, doing some more research, and then they realized what it was. So with many of these advanced driver assistance systems, this is the consumer's first experience with the technology. So it really comes down to how are we doing as an industry communicating that they have this technology, how it's going to operate, and then again, setting up those consumer expectations. So part of the issue that we've seen across industry is our ability to have a conversation with the consumer that essentially makes sure that we're not talking past each other. So we have a number of instances in the industry where a technology might go by 20 different names, you know, when you think about the different manufacturers and different brands that are out there. So for instance, a technology like adaptive cruise control, which is going to help you to maintain, you know, both a speed setting along with a distance setting to the vehicle in front of you, might have 20 different names in the industry. So one manufacturer might call it Distronic Plus, and another manufacturer might call it Intelligent Cruise Control. So you can imagine as new vehicle shoppers are out there looking at different vehicles and trying to compare, how do you know if those systems are the same or not? And that's just the naming itself. And so there's been an initiative in which AAA, Consumer Reports, JDPower, National Safety Council, we were the original four that were consistently seeing this confusion coming through from consumers regarding how these systems operate, what they're called, and even misconceptions thinking about some of the marketing names that were out there, anticipating that the system had greater capability than what it actually did. So we took this as a call to action to create this Clearing the Confusion document that is a living document. So we've actually gone through 3 different versions. This has been endorsed by Elaine Chow at the Department of Transportation. It's been endorsed by Society of Automotive Engineers, the PAVE Coalition. And so we're not looking to replace the marketing names at manufacturers, but when you look at that next level below, that's where we're looking to have a standardized conversation for what the systems are. And then again, that type of definition that is communicated to the consumer so that we are minimizing that hype, if you will, and making sure that we understand and communicate what the driver's role is in the system. So I know that this document here will be available to the attendees as well, so you can see it in more detail. So as we transfer into the future of mobility, specifically talking about automated vehicles, we've been performing research at JDPower on a quarterly basis to look at consumers' confidence and interest level with self-driving vehicles. So the data that you see here on the screen is for the U.S. market. We've also been researching this in other markets as well. A score of 100 is the greatest level of confidence for consumers, and so you can see that consumers have been very stagnant, if you will, on their level of confidence. This has not changed much over time. When we started this process, we were anticipating more of a change, certainly as more manufacturers were, talking about these systems, had more prototypes on the road, that we were anticipating more of a change over time. But that has not happened quite yet. We do continue to see the younger generation, so your Generation Y, Generation Z, having the greatest level of interest in this type of mobility model that continues to follow the trend that we see with other types of advanced technology. When we were looking at this research, we wanted to understand what was the consumer's knowledge level, self-proclaimed regarding self-driving vehicles. And again, I should set the context that when we defined self-driving vehicles for these participants, it was defined as a level 4 or a level 5 vehicle. So something in which the vehicle is able to maintain that driving task, whether it's in a geo-fenced area or whether it's anywhere, anytime. So very high capability system. So in this instance, we see that only 10% of consumers said that they knew a great deal about self-driving vehicles, and 27% said that they knew nothing at all. And we asked a couple other questions just probing into, are consumers seeking information and how is that influencing them versus, if they're stumbling upon information, what is that doing? All of this is really important just, again, to set up that context for, do we have an informed society and what can we do about that to better influence them? So within the research, we have looked at various executions and purposes for self-driving vehicles and then measuring the consumer comfort level with that technology. So on the left-hand side are the consumers that feel extremely comfortable with this type of mobility model. On the right-hand side is that percentage of consumers that are not comfortable at all. So we see a higher level of comfort with this transportation model where goods are being transported in self-driving commercial vehicles versus a consumer riding in a self-driving vehicle on their own. So this has been pretty consistent over the year that we've been doing this research. And this data here was from pre-COVID situation. So we're in field right now and very anxious to see how these numbers might have changed now that the reliance on delivery of goods has increased over the last 6 months. So some of the thoughts regarding consumers and self-driving vehicles, they see, one of the main advantages is transportation for those unable or unwilling to drive. And then from there, one of the other elements that we in industry place a great level of emphasis on is fewer crashes. On a consumer point of view, only 31% think that one of the advantages of self-driving vehicles will be fewer crashes, and I've got some more data coming up on that in a moment. For disadvantages, we see very much this level of trust factors coming through, where a high proportion of consumers are concerned with technology failures or errors, the possibility of the vehicle being hacked, or the legal and liability responsibility in an accident. So this has been very consistent over time, those types of trust factors, if you will. Even before we started this study, we were doing research on this matter, and we've seen that very consistent over time. So lots of consumer comments here. The consumer comments are really coming back to, hey, is the technology really ready, and then are we ready as a society, right? So what might be the unintended consequences that come about from this type of mobility model? So lots of questions on consumers' minds, definitely more questions than we have answers for at this point. So just diving into the traffic safety question a little bit more deeply. So we see that when we ask the explicit question of as self-driving vehicles become more common, how will traffic safety be affected? We see 37% say it will be better, 42% say it will be worse. When we break this down by the percentage of consumers that and their knowledge level of self-driving vehicles, those that have a great deal of knowledge about self-driving vehicles view that traffic safety will be better by a greater proportion than those that know nothing at all about it. And we see that same type of, just in the interest of time, I'm going to fast forward to this slide, and we see that type of distinction coming through in the likelihood to purchase a self-driving vehicle based on this knowledge level. So for someone that knows a great deal about it, the likelihood to want to purchase one is significantly larger than someone that knows nothing at all about it. So this just continues to set up the premise and the context of the importance of making sure that we are communicating to consumers what this type of mobility model contains, starting to build trust through appropriate level setting of expectations, creating clarity, and then recognizing the importance of consumers' experience with lower levels of automation and recognizing how that's going to tie into greater levels, right? So as consumers experience a level 1 or a level 2 automation system that's just on the road today, making sure that they have that positive experience. So I'm excited for your questions later on. I very much appreciate your attention, and I will turn it back over to Gina. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristin. It was really interesting. And yeah, I look forward to some questions and a discussion later on. But we're now going to turn it over to Kristin White, who's going to talk to us about some of the really exciting stuff they have going on in Minnesota.
Thank you, Jana, and everyone on the Eastern Seaboard. I just wanted to confirm that everyone can hear my audio.
Yes, you sound good.
Great, thank you. Well, everyone, thank you for allowing the Midwest to participate and crash your Eastern party. My name is Kristin White, as Jenna mentioned, and I am the director of our state's Connected and Automated Vehicle Program. We actually call our office CAV-X because there are so many unknowns in this field, including the unknown of how on earth is she going to tie a baby animal to confusion about connected and automated vehicles. And I sure hope that by the end of the conversation today, I will have addressed that. But it really starts with the fundamental understanding, as Kristin highlighted, about the confusion about where we are in the levels of automation. And so many of us on this call can recite the Society of Automotive Engineers, the levels of automation by heart in our sleep. But I can assure you, as we all would surmise, the public cannot. And so this is an example of one of the slide decks in our presentations when we go out to communities and we host what we call our CAV, or Connected and Automated Vehicle 101. And after we introduce ourselves and define what the technology is, the difference between connectivity and automation, we remind them that we are just in the very early stages of the evolution of this technology. And we remind them that despite what they are reading or hearing or seeing on tweets, on Twitter, we are not there. And there are no level 5 vehicles that are fully operational in all environments in our region. In fact, people think we are here. People think that the Stone Age is quite ancient history, and that despite the fact that the Jetsons cartoon is still 60 years out from 2020, they believe flying cars and this BMW concept autonomous vehicle are here today. And so one of the reasons I was asked to step into this role 2 years ago as a litigator and policy strategist, I too asked my leadership, why on earth do you want me to work in the field of CAV? And so I did what any relevant person would do when they're trying to have a crisis of conscience in their career. I called my friends and family, because that's what our communities do when they ask questions. And I asked my father, who lives in rural South Dakota, Dad, do you think I should work on CAV? And he thought for a moment and he said, well, honey, I know you like being a lawyer, but why on earth do you want to stop your career and work with baby cows? And immediately I realized my error in judgment in not explaining the work that this industry does day in and day out. And so when I told him about the opportunity, without a second thought, he immediately responded, oh yeah, no, that stuff, no, you don't have to worry about that. Elon Musk already has those deployed in some states, so we're good. That is just one story about the world that we live in day and day out. And so throughout the conversation today, I want to center us on the fundamental reasons why we do the work we do. And that is because we are not working on connected and automated vehicles and related emerging technologies for technology's sake, but we are doing it because we are all public servants committed to making our economies and our societies stronger, healthier, connecting children to educational access, improving quality of life, and making sure that our communities understand we are trying to help reduce transportation barriers and make a safer and healthier environment. So we must continue to remember that we build connections between communities, and this technology, as Kristin noted, has the potential to grow those connections or fundamentally destroy them. So we need to remind our stakeholders why we're doing this work, first and foremost. And then next, we need to make sure that we communicate what our goals are. So for example, I'm going to steal the Stephen Covey idea of begin with the end in mind. If we are able to partner with industry and research and mobility advocates to successfully deploy, every time I communicate about our program regionally, I remind them that these are the 6 clear goals that our region has identified to help us leverage technology to meet community needs. And many of us talk about the safety advancements related to CAV, but we need to be much more clearer in how these technologies leverage our other goals. So where do you start with this very challenging task? As Kristin noted, there are so many different views of CAV. Well, it starts with planning. And so there's a reason very strategically that our strategic plan, which was launched in 2019, is to look like a blueprint, because it is. Before you engage communities and your stakeholders, you need to plan how you're going to do that. And so in our strategic plan, what we did is we looked at the fundamental business functions that a transportation organization has. And what we realized is that in addition to making sure we plan for our operational impacts and our capital investment impacts and the safety impacts, we must also ensure that we think about communications. And here, what I mean by communications is so much more than the talking points. But in these strategies I'm about to talk about today, what I am talking about is also messaging, relationship building, and engagement. So we knew we had a place to start. And in our CAV strategic plan, we have several communications priorities. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these, but really focus on that third item in our public engagement and communications plan, where we recognize that rather than have individual communications and messaging for every DOT project or program, or even just a plan across the agency, we needed to think bigger. We needed to instead work with all of our stakeholders across the state and develop common messaging, education, and outreach roles that we could all agree on so that together we share the same message. But we can't go it alone. I'm really pleased one of our partners that's helping us in this effort is on the call today. And what we did is we leveraged our Minnesota CAV Challenge Innovation Program, which is essentially a grant program that challenges public and private partners to come together to meet the unique Minnesota challenges that we face, starting with the goals that you saw earlier. And insert shameless plug here, for those that are interested in learning more or want to support programs like this, we are now up for an America's Transportation Award. So if you just enter those words, America's Transportation Award, into your search engine, you can actually go and vote for this partnership program. Because 1 year ago, we were able to combine with 4 different partners across our urban region and throughout the state to partner together on an effort to help solve some of the challenges I'll be talking about today. So once we had the team in place, we started to ask the fundamental questions that have really been challenging us. What do our own communities think about this work? Leveraging the work that JDPower and AAA and Consumer Reports have been doing nationally, how do we drill it down to our own regional needs? And we recognize that before we communicate with the community or even develop a plan to communicate with them, we have to be extremely clear what our key goals are. So when I talk about this work, I want to make sure that everyone first understands my goal is to build knowledge and trust, not in the technology, but in how our government, private, and other partners are planning and preparing for it. 2, we want to make clear to everyone who's listening to us that we want to grow meaningful, ongoing relationships with individuals and communities so we can all be prepared together at the same time. And last, that then drives our goal to make sure that our CAV communications across the state are collaborative, they align, and they're similar. So that, as Kristin noted, when someone hears self-driving versus autonomous versus automated versus driverless vehicle, they know exactly what we're talking about. So it starts with really asking the hard questions about what have we done well and where do we have opportunities to grow. We took an assessment over the past 2 years as our program launched in April of 2018 formally at the CAVX office and started asking ourselves what deliverables and materials and engagement went really well and where did we really miss the mark. And here on the screen you see just a few examples of some of the dozens of materials we've delivered, including our own CAV strategic plan, as I mentioned, but also more directive engagement efforts such as newsletters, engaging at the Great Minnesota Get-Together, the Minnesota State Fair, and also including our static demonstrations that you see on the screen, as well as our pilots and deployments. But we know Minnesota is not the only player in the game. As I see multiple voices on the call, we know there are other regions and organizations that are doing really, really fantastic efforts, and also some that might be confusing the national conversation. So we, through our partners, reached out to multiple stakeholders, including research institutions, nonprofits, other DOTs, and even the private sector, including those organizations internationally, such as Mission Publique and the United Kingdom, who gave us excellent lessons learned. But one thing I really want to impart with all of us on the call today is that we know we do not have unlimited resources, and we have to prioritize our time, our staff, and our efforts. And so using a sphere of influence model is extremely critical in this work. And what I mean by this is, first, we start with our champions and our own decision makers that are involved in our work. So that means leveraging your own internal staff who are knowledgeable about these efforts, talking to your advisory and task force members at the state level, but then asking them to reach out to their own circles. And maybe there might be someone in their network that might not know about CAV or baby cows, but they heard about that word self-driving, and once they learn about it, are able to continue to grow that network. And last, but most importantly, is the work we're talking about today. Making sure that that last sphere, which essentially you should eliminate those borders of that last circle because that's everyone else in our world, those are the individuals that will be most impacted, but as Kristin noted, they are the most skeptical. They might hate technology. They might be distrusting of government. They may have been directly negatively impacted by our work in the past. So how do we engage them? Well, first it starts with outlining specific individuals and organizations in your own region on who you need to work with. And so I want to make sure that this slide is just to show how you could start with that effort. In our own work, as we're doing this work, we have over 200 different stakeholders we are currently or plan to reach out to. This is not an exhaustive list, but you see you can start to immediately engage your elected officials who might be excited about the technology. Make sure you have media present, people who are knowledgeable, and then slowly grow out that network. But I want to make very clear that these efforts can be concurrent. They are not in chronological order. Because just as you must actively engage rural communities and low-income communities, you also need to engage the businesses they work with, their educational partners, etc. So if there is one thing that in my time today I want to impart with this group, it is the International Association of Public Participation Spectrum on Engagement. So this is a fantastic spectrum for the work that we do that shows that there is a model of engagement that starts with what I'm doing today, which is informing you about our work. It's a one-way lateral communication, but it does not fully encapsulate how our communities want and need to be involved. So I really, really want to press upon here. A majority of the work that we do at DOTs is very far left on this spectrum. We are maybe consulting them, and maybe once in a while we do directly involve them in finding the problems together, but rarely do we say, community, you find the problem, and then we will support you as we implement that decision together. So in Minnesota, like a lot of organizations, we started with a public survey. And we've been doing this now for 3 years, but I really want to share an exciting news with you all, is that while the data on this slide is relatively old because we are just in the midst of concluding this survey, we now have one of the largest sample sizes nationally of individual community member respondents. And there's a few things I want to share with you today that are really important for our program. One is that you must make sure you work with community organizations and elders to get out the word about the survey. You can see an example on our website, MNDOT.gov/automated, and I would encourage you probably not to fill out the survey only because it's unique to Minnesota voices, but it can show you that with just 5 minutes, you can leverage your community support and reach, as you see in those blue dots, all across the region, not just metropolitan urban areas. But secondly, and more important, you need to ensure that you engage all demographic and income and values within your region. So immediately we saw in this survey that we were getting results from a majority white male audience, and we knew that that did not equally represent the voices of our region. So we leveraged those connections and those nonprofit partners to make sure we were hearing gender diverse and income diverse voices. And I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but you'll be able to read it once it's posted on your website. But just as Kristin mentioned, the more familiar you are with the technology, the more you are willing to engage in conversations on policy and where it should be deployed, and that will help drive our program. And so how do we leverage that survey data into engagement? And I'll conclude with that as I share some of our lessons learned. So one of the things we're doing is we're developing personas. And this is very common terminology in the marketing and communications and public relations sector, but we don't do a great job in DOTs leveraging this tool. And so this example is from the Denver region, where they try and use the survey data to then create an individual or a person who you need to think about how your work impacts long into the future. So rather than having the need for continuous surveys, you are able to develop someone who really does exemplify your different regional attitudes. But not just that, at the bottom of this list you see, more importantly, you are looking at the fears that this person and community holds, and that then in turn directly leverages into one of the most important things. The second key takeaway today is that every time you message something, you have to think about who is hearing that message. Before you can communicate, you have to know your audience, because these are the things that are going to directly impact them. So depending on my audience, if I'm, for example, with transportation engineers, I want them to hear me when I talk about our program that we're ensuring it's safe, we're accountable, we're sharing information with you. But when I'm talking to my tech industry partners, I want them to know that we're future thinking. We're out of the box creators, and we use human-centered design concepts to explore those technology innovations. Whereas if I'm working with my Chamber of Commerce, I'm going to talk about the economic growth opportunities and the interest I have in growing small tech startups within our region. And lastly, and again more importantly, centering all our conversations on this fundamental principle that when you're hearing me talk about this program, I want you to know that I'm here to listen first, which I know I'm not doing today, and also making sure I understand the barriers that you face day in and day out. So, as I conclude our conversation today, I'm going to confuse you with the fundamental don't in engagement information, which is a slide with a bunch of words on it. And the reason I put this slide up here is only because I know it's going to be saved on the website so you can review later. But these are some of the 30+ strategies we are using and or currently developing to implement in our program. And I'm just going to call out a couple to make sure we hear about them today. One is, as I talked about that engagement and empowerment spectrum, you need to create community advisory panels, councils, working groups, so that you have diverse voices telling you, hey, Kristin, I don't like your program messaging, and you know what, this deliverable, this pilot, it did not serve me well, so that you have that two-way feedback. But two, you must ensure you have some sort of data tracking tools to understand how many conferences you attended, how many people attended that meeting, but more importantly, what was their takeaway after that conversation? When do you plan to circle back with them? How do you continue to build off that meaningful relationship to make sure every couple months you're circling back with them? Third, I would ask you to look at items 14, 15, and 16. So we use our CAV 101 presentations and then help create ambassadors or liaisons in the community, because as we all know, the DOT and government are not always the best messengers for this work. And the last thing I would highlight on this list is that you must make sure, in item 24, you pair all of this education with an active public demonstration, which I'll talk a little bit more about as I close. But before I get there, I want to circle back to this fundamental concept of IAP2 and the spectrum of engagement. Because in those 30+ strategies that I just showed you, if you compare them to what engagement versus information versus empowerment is, you realize we're still missing the mark of it. And so continue to challenge yourselves to make sure that the engagement and communications you're doing actually are empowering communities and your stakeholders to inform the work that you do. So this is telling you that we have a little bit of work to do internally. So I wanted to close with just a few examples of some of the deliverables, and I know that my amazing colleagues in Maryland are going to share similar efforts. We make sure that our statewide newsletters are inclusive of different views. We have an internal newsletter that at least every couple months we share with our internal DOT staff of over 5,000. We have very, very clear and consistent messaging in the conferences we attend, And I do have to call out, it helps to have an incredible team, and I did in fact tell them to smile for this picture, but at least their fake smiles are very convincing. Here's just some other examples in the fact that you need to have unique and different deliverables for different audiences. So we have what we call one-page or fact sheets that explain the technology. When we have demonstrations, we use actual community faces and people we work with in our images. We have posters that in very plain language discuss and explain the technology, but we also leverage real-time interactive tools such as Mentimeter or Slido. So what are we hearing with all this work? And I just want to close in the last few minutes with why it's so important the work we do. And as you see in the center of this conversation, a more engaged community member having an actual argument online on Facebook with what, in fact, autonomous technology is. But that's an engaged individual. The disengaged individuals, the people who don't understand why we're doing, are the voices you see on the screen. When I use the term autonomous vehicle, I can assure you that 70% of my community members, even my friends, don't understand the work that I do. And when I was working with the Hmong village, with refugees from Vietnam in Minnesota, when we started this work 2 years ago, they told me, we don't even have a translation for infrastructure. So can you please stop using that word? What do you mean when you talk about planning our infrastructure for the future? Third, I want to make it very clear that we have to meet community members where they're at. When I can't get good access for my own transportation or get someone to take care of my kid, how am I going to participate in a community meeting and have to miss work and then fundamentally be disengaged from the conversation long into the future? Well, there are ways that we believe we can tackle that. And first and foremost, it's a multifaceted approach. You have to continuously evolve your communications and engagement and messaging and make sure you have a pattern, a patchwork, if you will, of all of these different tools together. You also need to acknowledge the world that we live in. So many of these conversations we have as a group, as a collaborative, forget that COVID is dramatically impacting all of this work. And we must, in Minnesota, for example, we recognize that we cannot introduce the new technology at the same time that an individual is fearful for their public safety. So for some of our public demonstrations, we put them on hold because we do not want the perception of this new and exciting technology to be long tied to the concerns about public health and safety. We also, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the systemic racism that has impacted our work, our conversations, and our lives. My office is 8 blocks from the 3rd precinct where the officers that murdered George Floyd live. And as I tried to work with my consultants and deploy our projects, helicopters flied overhead. And this is not a new story for our community members in Minnesota and our region. So we must acknowledge our assumptions and use an equity lens, which I would be happy to talk about in another conversation, to inform our work. In my last 2 minutes, I just want to share why this work has mattered and my very quick lessons learned, major takeaways. This shows fundamentally why our approach is one of the strongest that I would recommend. Because on the left, you see the AAA survey that is tried to be issued every quarter for the past several years, where they ask this and several other questions. And as we would assume, most Americans, and of course this number fluctuates, they are hesitant and afraid of this technology. But in Minnesota, with all of the survey work that we've done over the last 2 years, when we pair an educational information opportunity with an actual demonstration, static or live, over 80% of Minnesotans are excited about the work and want to work with us. So how can I help you? I hope today's conversation was helpful, and these are some of the takeaways that we've learned over the last 2 years. Is you need to have clear goals that help you learn from previous work. We really feel it's important to do an industry scan across the region, and TDTC is a great region to work from. You need to make sure that any messaging you do is directly tailored to that individual or stakeholder. I really do think that the power of surveys cannot be understated. And one thing I did not mention is part of our effort is we now have 60+ individuals from this survey that we are interviewing in depth to understand what their actual fears and concerns are and how they want to work with us in the future. Another thing I would highlight here are items 10 through 12. As a lawyer, I'm going to put my lawyer hat on, we must make sure we identify mitigation strategies and plan and prepare for crisis events. Because if Tesla or another company has a collision in another part of the country, we know how that impacts our own work and public perceptions. And so I just want to close with a few things that I hope came across today. I really hope that you take time to build that blueprint for your engagement and messaging and outreach. I really am asking that you think about the IAP2 spectrum and how you engage and empower communities and uplift them. I really do want you to think about a multifaceted approach and many different engagement options. And really, of course, with the work and the folks on this call, we can leverage public-private partnerships and all of our diverse expertise, but also make sure that you ask the questions of your stakeholders and your own individuals to make sure that if you got something wrong, you can improve in the future. And 7, I would just add that even though this is a little crass, don't let a crisis go to waste, we are in a crisis innovation field. And with the events of the last year, we absolutely have an opportunity to show how the industry is leveraging their innovation to build community connectivity, reduce barriers, and to make sure that people like my dad understand we are working not with baby cows, but with the innovation and safety solutions of the future. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Thank you so much, Kristin, for such an exciting presentation. So many great ideas that you have going on. And again, I look forward to, we should have a little bit of time for questions and conversation, but I do want to get to our friends in Maryland, back here at home in the coalition region. So Carole and Roxane, why don't you take it away?
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you. And I always love hearing from Kristin White in Minnesota. She always has amazing ideas. And I really like today's webinar because we are looking at different facets of communication. And so today, Maryland is really going to focus on communicating within our agencies and how we try to educate our own staff and even sometimes our own leadership on what it means to have a CAV either on our roadways or within our communities. So I'm going to start off with just really quickly telling you what we're going to talk about CAV in Maryland, who we are, Maryland DOT, and then the 2 speakers, so Roxane from MDTA and myself from the State Highway Administration. In Maryland, we do have a statewide working group, and this working group's been around for a couple years now already. It's established a vision, as you can see on the left-hand side, safe, efficient, equitable transportation. And the group also has 4 main subgroups looking at the technology, looking at policy, freight, and our emergency responder subgroup. All 4 of these groups have helped to shape the conversation around connected and automated vehicles in Maryland. And we have some links here. You can go look at it. But this is sort of the foundation of where Maryland has been going with CAV. Within the timeline of when the working group was established and throughout the years up until today and yesterday, we've been deploying resources. We've been working with our stakeholders, which span over approximately 300 different people just for the statewide working group. And then sort of leveraging what Kristin was mentioning with how you collaborate and how you put out resources. And I love that spectrum of empowerment because at some point you will have to let go of CAV and you're going to have to let somebody else pick it up and say, I understand what it means and I can implement it within my jurisdiction, within my community, within my family even. So this is sort of where we're trying to get to. And so we wanted to highlight the increasing number of things that we end up doing over the years. You can see on the left-hand side, it's a few things here and there, and then you start setting up the foundations. And 2019 was really a kick to the program. We really started moving forward pretty fast. In 2020, I mean, we need to update this slide already. There are things that we're already doing that we're really excited about. So at this point, I also want to explain what we mean by the Maryland DOT. And this is something we tend to try to explain to everybody because Maryland DOT actually encompasses a lot of the different modes that a lot of other states might have separate. But for example, the Motor Vehicle Administration, who does all the licensing of our vehicles and the permitting, that's under MDOT. Aviation and port and transit, they're all under one umbrella. State Highway, which is where I'm coming from, we're all there as one Maryland DOT. And it's actually been really helpful because we're now able to cross not just the people, but the modes of transportation. The thinking is different, and the diversity of opinions provides such a great start to bring the future forward for CAV. And so today we're actually covering just 2 of those areas. We've got Roxane from the Maryland Transportation Authority, so that's the gray box, and then myself from the State Highway Administration. And I provide these because it always is a little bit confusing, but hopefully that's helped sort of frame the conversation. Roxane's going to go up next. If Roxane, you want to take over and talk about MDTA's work.
Thank you, Carol. That was a great overview of the Maryland CAV program. Great information coming from Kristin up north. Looking forward to the question and answer session. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Roxane Mukai from the Transportation Authority, and I think most of you are familiar with us, but for those of you who aren't, quick introduction is the MDTA has been responsible for the state's toll facilities and for financing the new revenue-producing transportation projects since 1971. We have 8 toll facilities, 2 turnpikes, 2 tunnels, 4 bridges, and they all help keep traffic moving in Maryland. All of our projects and services are funded through tolls paid by the customers who use the MDTA's facilities. Okay, having trouble with the little button. There. Sorry about that. So now on to the CAV communications at the authority, or MDTA. To facilitate our internal discussions, we established a CAV working group internally with at least 1 liaison for most of the divisions and offices that comprise the core business functions. Working with these CAV liaisons, we've developed a CAV strategic plan that has been approved and adopted by our board back in October 2018, and it's posted on our website. It provides a really high-level CAV target goals that are compatible with our full strategic plan for the agency and incorporates and references all the other plans that we have here. One of the things we had planned to do was start looking at having a business plan with actual actionable items developed, but because of COVID, we've stopped that, retracted a little bit. And so we're working on some other things this year. Since MDTA owns and operates and maintains the state's toll transportation facilities, it has some similar infrastructure concerns as most of the DOTs, but unlike most of the DOTs, we also have a police force. And since we're self-financed through tolls, we have those 2 extra areas of interest. And thus our CAV perspectives can be rather far-ranging. For example, our investment portfolio, where we hold the toll money prior to extending it again, can be negatively affected by the CAV technology advances, or if we're invested in a resource, the value could be increased if that resource becomes a material that's needed to advance a future CAV program. So we do a lot of thinking about that stuff. From a tolling standpoint, a DOT might primarily see the infrastructure issues related to connected vehicle roadside unit applications. MDTA is also looking at potential business investment costs and process changes, data protection and management issues, giant technology pilots, and project opportunities. Today, most of the tolling agencies typically provide customers with a tolling device, such as a transponder, and directly interact with that customer to create the registration and payment agreement. Most recently, we've had cellular phone applications that create a bring your own device kind of program, and that eliminates or reduces the direct customer contact the tolling agencies may have. The bring your own device programs now include programmable transponder devices embedded in certain new vehicle models, and those can be activated by the customers interacting with another third-party vendor, which may or may not have a direct relationship with the tolling agencies. Advances in CAV have that potential to create a disconnect between motorists, the physical infrastructure, and our enforcement units. So we're thinking about things along those lines. So our CAV liaisons are serving as our primary resource within their divisional office for providing a connection to the statewide as well as the internal CAV working group. The liaisons work within their teams to suggest ways to incorporate CAV preparation into the planned projects and raise potential areas of concern. Some of the CAV liaisons have hosted lunch and learn sessions internal to MDTA. And they've also gone out and done public speaking for larger groups. One picture on the right is Lieutenant Pulliam at the time. He's now a captain. And that was way back in 2017 when we were talking about law enforcement issues possibly related to CAV items. And now in 2020, we're seeing a lot of emergency responder forums picking up on those topics. So continuing to share information. MDTA CAV liaisons all rely on each other internally, and they reach out to our sister agencies within the state, talking about the airport and ports, because our police unit also does patrol at the ports and airports. We try to find partners for interesting projects, complete our work efforts. So communication is the key component for moving that transformative technology forward. And COVID has decreased our available time and budget for CAV investments this year, so we have modified our work plan, and we're now working on trying to complete the Connected Roadway Classification System self-evaluation that was published through NTRIP about a year ago. Hopefully this effort will allow us to identify targeted CAV action items to act on soon. So looking forward to hearing from all of you and your projects as well. One of the things I wanted to put up here for just a general conversation was the conversation we've had with our fleet managers, because they're equipped in both the traffic safety patrol units as well as the police vehicles. They've run into the thing where that frontal collision prevention systems, or the frontal braking systems, have prevented us, until we figured out how to disconnect them, from operating with the push bars and bumpers on those vehicles, because the automatic emergency braking would keep activating. That was kind of a funny little thing that happened to us along the way to getting CAVs incorporated into our fleet. Now, Carole, if you're ready to pick up for State Highway.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roxane. And she's being humble. She's the reason why our emergency responders are so involved with the Maryland CAV working group. Roxane has been critical in making that happen, and we're really excited that she's been able to bring that experience forward. So really quick on Maryland State Highway Administration, this slide may look a little tiny on your screen, but hopefully you can go look at it later and see sort of what MDOT-SHA covers. This is where I'm trying to impart to you the fact that there's a big number in the middle that says nearly 3,000 to 29,600 employees. That's just the State Highway Administration, and those are the people that we've been trying in the past 2 years or so to reach out to, teach and educate about CAV, so to try and get to that spectrum Kristin was mentioning of empowering them to become those champions. Within our own agency, we have been pushing different types of communication strategies. I'm sure that several of you have these methods to discuss and impart knowledge. So examples include agency-wide news. We share knowledge across an email blast that everybody can get, and it says, you know, we have a survey out, please let us know what you think. We may have a news update about our strategic plan being redone, and we want to know about what you think about CAV. And we always have that one question, Kristin and both Kristins mentioned, is, would you even know what we're talking about? So it is a great point of tracking to have that broadcast, because I can also then go back in my history and see when I sent that email. But it's a great way of being able to share information and track a performance measure for long term. We also do the lunch and learn. It was one of those interesting moments for State Highway Administration where we hadn't done one of those pretty much ever, in the sense of training everybody at once online, and this was pre-COVID. And it was really interesting to learn the limitations of your agency's IT system. So if you do push this one, start by trying to understand if your IT can handle it. We also did a CAV 101 interactive training application. Again, probably similar to other DOTs, we have a training mechanism, and we use that platform to say, we're going to distribute a physical training that anybody can take whenever they need to. So if they have a 10-minute slot that they want to sort of do this little training and learn a little bit more about CAV, then they'll be able to do that on their own time. From that, I just wanted to show you like a quick snapshot of what it looks like, and hopefully it'll show well here. But this is sort of a screenshot of that training. It'll let you click through what different things of the CAV ecosystem might look like. It also lets you drag and drop, so that it's interactive. We try to make sure the training wasn't just you listening for 10 minutes and hoping it would end sooner rather than later. We try to interact with the users themselves. And we also have what we call a SharePoint site. It's an internal site that allows everyone within the State Highway Administration to access information. And we've leveraged this a lot to share information with everybody. It includes standards that we might know about, and this includes the Connected Vehicle Pool Fund study reports that are being put out, anything from SAE, IEEE, all those things are up there. It provides reports that are still at research level, resources, the IT architecture, anything out there that we think can be helpful for them. We also include the training material, those flyers that Kristin mentioned, those things are really helpful. And I'm going down the list and I'm increasing the level of interest that we've seen from our staff. The blog that we have posts a weekly news brief for everybody to see, and this news is across the board. It could be just about anything to keep everyone aware of what's coming across them. For me, it's really helpful because I can then know what people might be reading, and I'm talking to people outside of the CAV in crowd, if you will, right? So this is what the public is seeing. So it helps me understand what might be in the news, but then it also helps others capture what might be of interest within the CAV ecosystem. We also take notes of webinars for everybody else to see. Again, I'm increasing in the level of interest that we've seen from our staff. They actually really like this because they're not always able to attend webinars, but they like to be able to see or read what was said. And maybe they only had interest in one little piece and they didn't want to see all of it. Our meeting minutes from our bi-monthly internal meetings and summary of updates that we send to our leadership are also increasingly helpful. And finally, the biggest one that our staff has seen as really, really helpful are the presentations that we provide, so like this one right now, to external parties, or what MDOT's official response is on a request for comments from the US DOT and things like that. When they see those, they're very interested because they want to make sure that they're saying the same thing. And most of the time, our staff is willing to impart the same, front. Like, we don't really want to be saying different things, and they understand that. We also have a public-facing several public-facing documents, and the reason I bring this up is for those that the staff internally that don't always know whether this program is like a real program. So we do get that question. It's like, well, is this really a program within the agency? And again, just a reminder, there's 3,000 of us, so you don't always reach everyone at the same time. But this helps to show that this program is real. It has input from, you can see our governor's name, our administrators, so they understand that this is an ongoing program. Then we also track it every year. So this isn't just a strategic plan on the shelf and then somebody is leaving it there forever. Now we also track it and we make sure that they know that we're tracking it. So we send this out to them annually to check out what we've been up to. And some other efforts, I mentioned champions, similar to what was said previously. We have representatives from different offices, different divisions, and we expanded from initially a dozen people to now 50 people representing legal, pavement, procurement, communications, and they're across the whole broad spectrum. And again, being able to bring in that diverse perspective, incredibly helpful in developing new ideas and making sure we're providing a balanced product. That's followed up with one-on-one conversations, making sure that they understand where they might be helpful, and then actually assigning strategies and having them own those strategies. I might be the division chief for the CAP program or CAV program within the State Highway Administration, but my responsibility is for them to take ownership and to move this technology forward. When I'm talking about pavement improvements for CAV, they need to understand what I'm talking about, and they need to be able to push that as part of their normal process. So it is exciting to see that moving forward. A few lessons learned for everybody here: having material that's editable. I'm talking a Word document instead of a PDF or a graphic, a SharePoint site that you know how to edit yourself. Really, really helpful. We had a forum in our SharePoint site for a while. Nobody used it. It was just one of those things, one of those communication strategies that didn't really work. Well, it was easy for us to remove it. It was easy for us to edit the material. So it's one of those things, if you can use those easy to edit material, goes a long way. Focus on groups that actually pay attention, and I'm not saying groups that necessarily completely agree with you, but people that are actually listening. Hit them first, hit that critical mass, and then expect that it'll push that broader sphere of influence Kristin was mentioning earlier. Have a predetermined outreach strategy. Really helps when you don't just release everything at once. If you think about it as a marketing strategy, you have to keep their interest. And then to get to the before last point that says repeat yourself, And at some point, you'll start knowing when they start coming back to you and they're like, Carole, I get it, CAV. But then you sort of hit them with a second one, right? You're like, oh, this was just the flyers. Now check out this training strategy, and that's 6 months down the line. And then a year down the line, you have a survey. So try to make sure that you have that strategy in mind and that you're keeping their interest and you're staying on their radar. And then keep your young staff involved, not just saying young, but anyone who's really like excited about this stuff. You'll get some ideas that are just great, and then they'll be able to keep the torch going because they are so excited. They want this to keep moving forward. So my main takeaway, collaborate, network broadly, and be kind. You never know who knows who, and obviously who might be holding the key to funding your CAV program. I have had this question a few times. People are like, well, how did you get CAV in the Highway Safety Improvement Plan or the State Highway Safety Plan or the whatever plan? I'm like, well, I knew the person and we have a good working relationship. And so when I asked, they said, yeah, let's talk. So keep those relationships going. Don't burn bridges and collaborate with as many people as possible. CAV does affect so many different fields, as Kristin mentioned and others have mentioned before. I believe this is my last slide, and I've tried to push through so we have time for questions. And I believe I will turn it over to, is it Jenna or Joanna?
Yes, this is Jenna. Thank you so much, both Carole and Roxane. That was great, and good overview and some really specific things to think about as you're working internally at your agencies. So we do have a couple more, I guess 3 more polling questions. I want to quickly give people the opportunity to answer. Partially it's just to kind of get a sense from the participants today if there are some additional resources or things that would help you as you're thinking about these things. And of course, us as the coalition, we're always trying to figure out, what's the most valuable way for us to spend our time and support our members. So that's part of the motivation here. So the first question is about whether any of these areas listed here are things that your agency would really benefit from. So you can see the list there, and go ahead and check any of them that apply. You can check all of them if you think that it would all be helpful. Meanwhile, as you answer this question, you're also welcome to add any other questions you have in the chat box for our presenters. We will have a few more minutes for questions. I have one in mind that I can't wait to ask, but we hope to have a few others as well. It looks like the answers are coming in from question number 3. Joanne, I'll let you close it out when you think it looks like we've gotten the most response. I'm not sure if I'm getting a lag here or not. My connection continues to be a little bit spotty.
Of course, today. I'll keep an eye on it. It still looks like we're getting a few more responses.
Okay, great.
At this point,
Thank
we're going to
close
it in 3, 2, 1. Move on to the next one.
Okay, great. So question number 4 is about the greatest challenge that you see related to communication around this technology. And again, we're sort of trying to get a sense of what's a greater challenge with a lesser challenge. So unfortunately, we can't rank them with this technology, but we can allow you to pick your top 3. So if you can go ahead and just indicate there of these 5 options, what do you see as the greatest challenge? And meanwhile, while those are coming in, I will go ahead and ask my question, which is really, it kind of ties in, I think, to all 3 presenters. So maybe I'll ask them each to chime in on this, but maybe starting with Kristin Kolodge, which is that getting to that idea about trust and how important it is for the public to be able to trust this technology. So my question for Kristin Kolodge is, do you ever get a sense through your work or your surveys that you do who the customers or the public is looking for, who they trust the most, I guess? Is that do they sort of have trust in our public agencies because they don't sort of have that sense that there's profit behind that to be made, or are they looking for the auto manufacturers who are really building this technology for trust? So that's the version for Kristin Kolodge, and then I'm also interested in hearing from Kristin and Carole and Roxane about how they feel that trust element comes into the communication they're doing both internally and externally in their agency.
Well, that's a really great question, Jenna, and trust is absolutely centric to consumer acceptance and adoption for this type of future of mobility. So the more that we can recognize that, the importance of that emotion, and then what we can do to help influence it going forward. So from the consumer agency perspective, consumers place trust in your agencies to be able to help qualify if this type of technology is going to be safe. So one of the metrics that consumers are looking for is that type of how do I know this is going to be safe to use, that it's ready to use, et cetera. So some of that is certainly state level, some of that is federal level, but consumers are looking for that type of qualification that this technology is ready for their use. And so that absolutely is building up to the reasoning behind, one facet, if you will. And there's, this trust element has multiple facets. I mean, there's going to be the legal and liability element, right? What happens if my vehicle does get into a crash, an automated vehicle does get into a crash, and there's certainly lots of conversations there, even if consumers think these should, if they're zero crashes is actually a reality. So lots of messaging surrounding it, and certainly an important takeaway that it sounds like your organizations have a really great beat on it, and so definitely the right trajectory going forward.
And this is Kristin White with Minnesota. Adding to that, Jenna and everyone, my response in who does the public trust the most is twofold. First and foremost, the media, and two is the industry. And I'm not even sure if trust is the right, verb here or noun, but that is who they're getting their information from. And the media, not to disparage the media because I highly respect them, but they too don't understand the technology. And so when they're interpreting in a 8-word headline what an announcement from Elon Musk is doing, it very often is inaccurate. And so a couple of key takeaways there are get involved with Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, which Kristin referenced in her slide deck. They have a brand new Public Sector Advisory Council, which Minnesota is a member. All of you should also be members. And then second, the AASHTO and the Cooperative Automated Transportation Coalition are trying to think about new and innovative ways to engage industry through forums with them so that we can help understand what they're trying to communicate and make sure we can work with them so the public is hearing one message.
Yeah,
Great,
Carole,
thank you,
I'll
Kristin.
jump in real quick. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add real quick, just a quick note to consider that there's different levels of what we'll call trust, but it's really a relationship. You have your relationships internal to the folks that you work with, and whether they trust you to do certain things a certain way. Do they trust that you're going to do the process to the safest possible extent for an engineering design versus public outreach on their communications, right? So try to understand where they're coming from when they might push back. And then everything else that was just mentioned on the external side and the person just picking up a word, I really resonate well with what Kristin said about self-driving versus automated cars. When I say automated cars to like my own family, they're like, what? No, self-driving. Oh, I see what you mean. But they're picking that up from the media. So just those relationships and understanding that maybe you are not the single one person that has to be the one building that trust, it's expanding across your sphere of influence.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you all for those interesting answers. And I think that, through those 3 answers, there's so much that touched into the different presentations. And, it goes to, as Carole and Roxane said, those key relationships, even within your organization, keep those going. And that collaborative work, which of course is kind of the core of what we do at the coalition. So I'm also looking at here some of your great answers to this polling question number 5 about what the coalition can continue to do. So thanks for chiming in there. They all really resonate with our core mission and what we're trying to do. So with that, I want to thank again all of the excellent speakers. This is really a robust conversation. And the presentation and the recording will be available again on our website. And so please share widely with anyone else you think would enjoy this. And thank you all, and have a wonderful afternoon.